5:42 a.m. A jagged, rocky valley in the heart of the Middle East. The morning air is cold, biting, and smells of dry shale. A small patrol unit moves through a narrow pass, their boots crunching on loose gravel. Suddenly, the silence is shattered. High-velocity rounds ping off the rocks. Gunfire erupts from the high ridge above. The squad scrambles for cover, their hearts pounding against their ribs. In the center of the chaos is combat medic Ava Ramirez. Their designated sniper is down, bleeding. No one is watching the ridge. Ava looks up, reaches out, and picks up the rifle. She knows what must be. Ava Ramirez was used to the silence. In a world of loud machinery, booming commands, and the constant, restless bravado of infantrymen, her role was often seen as purely reactive. To most of the men in the squad, she was simply Doc. She was the person who patched the blisters after a 20-mile ruck, checked the hydration levels in the blistering noon heat, and made sure everyone took their anti-malarials without complaining. She was essential to the unit's longevity, yes, but in their minds she was a passenger in the fight, a non-combatant who stayed in the soft center of the formation. Ava didn't mind the labels. In fact, she preferred them. She had been through the same grueling basic training as every other soldier in the unit. She had hiked the same miles with 80 pounds of gear digging into her shoulders. She had breathed the same choking dust of the training ranges. But her focus was inherently different. While the infantrymen spent their weekends practicing their groupings at the range and arguing over the best weapon attachments, Ava practiced tying tourniquets in total darkness. While they studied offensive maneuvers and room-clearing tactics, she studied the human circulatory system under extreme pressure. She knew where the arteries hid and how fast a man could leak his life into the sand if she wasn't perfect. "Hey, Ramirez," a young specialist named Miller had joked during the mission briefing earlier that morning. He was leaning against a Humvee, chewing on a piece of dried beef. "Don't get too close to the front of the line today. We wouldn't want you to get any nasty dirt on those clean bandages. Just stay behind us and look pretty until someone needs a Band-Aid for a scratched knee." Ava didn't even look up from her medical kit. She was busy checking the expiration dates on her vented chest seals and ensuring her trauma shears were sharp. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to prove her toughness with empty words or locker room talk. She had learned long ago that in the military, the loudest person in the room is rarely the one holding it all together when the X gets hot and the world starts to bleed. The patrol today was a routine reconnaissance mission through Sector 7. The valley was a gray zone, a place that wasn't quite enemy-controlled territory, but was far from safe. The terrain was a tactical nightmare. The walls of the valley rose steeply on either side, jagged limestone cliffs filled with deep cracks and dark caves that could hide an entire battalion from aerial surveillance. The squad moved in a staggered tactical file, their eyes constantly scanning the high ridges for any glint of glass or puff of dust. The atmosphere was heavy, the kind of stillness that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. You could feel the eyes watching from above. As they reached the narrowest part of the pass, the terrain shifted abruptly. The loose gravel gave way to larger boulders, creating a natural funnel that forced the unit closer together. It was the perfect spot for an ambush. The sergeant, a battle-hardened veteran named Henderson, raised a closed fist to signal for a halt. But before the hand signal could even be completed, the silence of the morning was shattered by a sound like a whip cracking. It was a precise, high-caliber round. It struck the ground inches from Henderson's left boot, sending a spray of sparks and stone shards into the air. Then the entire valley exploded with noise. Chaos is the only word for it. The squad dove for whatever cover they could find. Low boulders, shallow depressions in the sand, or the rusted remains of an old truck. Rounds were pinging off the rocks, kicking up blinding clouds of dust and gray smoke. The enemy had the high ground, a clear advantage that allowed them to rain fire down with impunity. In that first opening volley, the unit's designated marksman, a quiet soldier named Jackson, took a direct hit to the shoulder. He collapsed instantly, his heavy bolt-action rifle clattering into the rocks. Ava didn't wait for a command. She didn't wait for the firing to stop or for Henderson to call her name. While the rest of the squad was suppressed, Pinned down by the sheer volume of lead and trying to figure out where the fire was coming from, Ava was already in motion. She was crawling through the dirt toward Jackson, her medic bag thumping against her side. The air wasn't just air anymore. It was a lethal cloud of heat, metal, and the metallic tang of fear. To her, the battle had just become a medical procedure. If you think quiet professionals are often underestimated, type unfair. Ava reached Jackson in a matter of seconds, though it felt like a lifetime under the relentless sun. He was slumped behind a rock that was far too small for his muscular frame, his face already turning a sickly shade of gray. His shoulder was a mess of shredded fabric and deep red, his breathing coming in jagged, terrifying gasps. He was still clutching his bolt-action rifle with his good hand, but his fingers were white, shaking too hard to even cycle the bolt. "Doc, I can't see where they are," Jackson choked out, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Ava ignored the gunfire screaming overhead. She went to work with a mechanical efficiency that only comes from hundreds of hours of repetition. She was in the medical bubble, that psychological state where the roar of the battlefield disappears, and the only thing that exists in the universe is the wound beneath her hands. She used her shears to cut away his sleeve, exposing the entry wound. It was a clean through and through, but the bleeding was massive. She applied direct pressure, her hands as steady as a surgeon's in a sterile theater, even as a bullet chipped the rock inches from her helmet. "Stay with me, Jackson," she whispered, her voice low and grounding. "Focus on my voice. Breathe with me. Just breathe. You're going home." As she worked, she wasn't just looking at the wound. Her peripheral vision was wide, her ears tuned to the environment. She was listening. She was observing. She noticed the rhythmic intervals of the enemy fire. There were 3 distinct shooters on the north ridge, their muzzle flashes visible in the shadows. One more was stationed on the south ridge. They were leapfrogging their shots, maintaining a constant suppression that kept the squad pinned down. They weren't just shooting. They were managing the squad's movement, waiting for them to panic and run so they could pick them off in the open. She looked at her squad. Miller was blind firing his carbine over a rock, wasting ammunition without a target. Henderson was shouting into the radio, trying to coordinate air support, but the signal was bouncing off the canyon walls, weak and filled with static. They were sitting ducks in a stone trap. The enemy was patient, and the squad was running out of time. Jackson's rifle lay in the dirt between them, its barrel scorched by the sun. It was a beautiful piece of machinery, a long-range precision tool with a high-powered optic. Jackson was the only one in the unit qualified to use it, and he was currently holding a piece of gauze to his own shoulder with a dying grip. "Jackson, I need you to hold this pressure. Hold it hard. Do not let go," Ava commanded. She placed his hand over the wound and felt the heat of his blood. She looked up at the ridge again. She saw a tiny flash of light, a scope glint. It was the North Ridge shooter, repositioning for a better angle on Henderson. In that moment, Ava Ramirez remembered her training. Not the medical training, but the soldier training. In the U.S. Army, every combat medic is a rifleman first. Every medic has to qualify at the range, and every medic has to understand tactical fire and maneuver. She remembered the long, lonely hours at the range during her advanced marksmanship course, a course she had taken simply because she didn't want to be the weak link in a team. She remembered how to read the wind by watching the way the fine dust moved in the draws. She remembered the cold-bore logic of a precision rifle. She reached out and pulled the bolt-action rifle toward her. It was surprisingly heavy, a solid anchor in a world that was spinning out of control. It felt fundamentally different than her standard-issue carbine. It felt like a heavy responsibility. "Sergeant!" Ava shouted over the squad radio frequency, her voice cutting through the panic and the noise of the M4s. "I have a positive visual on the primary shooter. North Ridge, 10 o'clock. Approximately 250 meters up. He's in the shadow of the overhang." "Ramirez, stay down and do your job," Henderson yelled back, his voice frantic. "We need you on the wounded. We can't have the medic getting picked off." "Wounded is stabilized for transport," Ava replied, her voice dropping into that low, calm, tactical frequency that forces people to listen. "But we're going to lose the whole squad if no one suppresses that ridge. Jackson is out of the fight. I'm taking the watch. Cover me for 3 seconds. She didn't wait for Henderson to agree. She didn't wait for permission from a chain of command that was currently failing. She moved into a perfect prone position, her body flat against the burning sand, using Jackson's body as a partial shield. She adjusted the bipod with a sharp click. She peered through the high-powered optic. The world suddenly became very small, very silent, and very clear. She saw the enemy shooter. He was arrogant, leaning out from behind a crag, his finger on the trigger as he prepared to fire another round at Miller's position. Ava took a deep, slow breath. She felt her heart rate begin to plummet. To her, this was just another clinical procedure. Line up the crosshairs. Account for the elevation. Feel the wind. Exhale half a breath. Hold. If you realize training matters in unexpected moments, type, "I was wrong." Ava didn't pull the trigger immediately. A superhero would have started blasting as soon as they saw the target. A quiet professional waits for the window. She reached up and adjusted the turret on the scope, dialing in the correction for the steep vertical incline. The enemy shooter on the north ridge was tucked into a deep shadow, but his muzzle flash had given him away, and now through the high-definition glass, she could see the fabric of his vest moving as he breathed. He thought he was invisible. He thought the Americans were too broken and too scared to look up. Ava's finger rested on the trigger with the lightness of a butterfly. She felt the wind on her cheek, a light, consistent breeze from the east. She held the crosshairs slightly to the left of the man's chest to compensate. Crack. The rifle kicked firmly into her shoulder. It was a solid, honest recoil that she absorbed with her entire body. Through the scope, she watched the impact. She didn't hit the man directly. She didn't need to. The round struck the rock ledge exactly 3 inches from his head, showering him in a spray of stone fragments. He vanished behind the cover instantly, his rhythm destroyed. The relentless fire from the North Ridge stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. "North Ridge primary suppressed," Ava reported over the radio, her voice devoid of emotion. "Henderson, move the squad to the overhanging rocks at the 3 o'clock. Now! You have a 20-second window before he regains his nerve. Go!" The sergeant didn't hesitate this time. He had heard the authority in her shot and the precision in her call. "Move! Move! Ramirez has the watch! Get to the overhang!" The squad scrambled across the loose rock. Because Ava had silenced the primary threat, they were able to cross the open, lethal ground without taking a single hit. They reached the better cover, a series of deep limestone alcoves that provided overhead protection from the high-angle fire. Ava didn't move from her spot in the dirt. She stayed flat, her eyes still glued to the optic. She shifted her focus to the south ridge. She saw the second shooter. He was trying to reposition, scrambling across a patch of loose scree to get a better angle on the squad's new hiding spot. He was moving fast, thinking he was outside the effective range of the squad's carbines. She tracked him with the muzzle of the rifle, her breathing steady and rhythmic. She didn't look for a kill shot. She looked for a suppression shot that would force a retreat. She fired twice in rapid mechanical succession. The rounds hit the rocks right beneath the shooter's boots, sending a terrifying spray of stone shards into his legs. He screamed, a distant, thin sound in the valley, and scrambled back into a cave, his tactical advantage gone. For the next 10 minutes, Ava Ramirez held the entire valley. She wasn't an elite sniper from a movie. She was a disciplined soldier using a specialized tool with absolute focus. She provided the eyes and the reach that the sergeant desperately needed to regain control of the situation. "Ramirez!" Henderson's voice came over the radio, sounding breathless but profoundly relieved. "Air support is 2 minutes out. I've got a lock on their frequency. Can you keep those ridges pinned for 120 more seconds?" "Copy, Sergeant. I have eyes on both primary exits. They aren't moving an inch as long as I'm behind this glass." When the AH-64 Apaches finally roared into the valley, the sound of their engines echoing like thunder, the fight was essentially over. The enemy, realizing they had lost the advantage of surprise and were now being accurately monitored and suppressed from below, retreated deep into the mountain network. The danger had passed as quickly as it had arrived. The squad moved out of the alcoves as the dust began to settle, their weapons held at the ready, but the tension had broken. They gathered in a tight perimeter around Ava and the wounded Jackson. Jackson was pale, his skin slick with sweat, but he was fully conscious. He looked at his rifle, then up at Ava, who was currently clearing the chamber and setting the safety. "Doc, tell me the truth. You didn't scratch the finish on my girl, did you?" He joked weakly, his voice thin. Ava handed the rifle back to him with a steady hand, her face returning to its usual, unreadable professional mask. "I adjusted your windage, Jackson. You were pulling nearly 3 inches to the right. You need to check your zero when we get back to the FOB." The squad stood in a silent circle, looking at her. Miller, the one who had told her to stay behind and look pretty, looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. He looked at the high ridge, then at the heavy rifle, then at the small woman who was currently back on her knees, rechecking Jackson's bandage with total concentration. "Ramirez," Miller started, rubbing the back of his neck and looking at his boots. I didn't know medics were trained for that. I mean, the way you moved, the way you called the shots, I thought—" Ava didn't look up from her patient. She was busy checking Jackson's capillary refill and recording his vitals on a Sharpie-marked piece of tape on her leg. "Specialist Miller," she said quietly, her voice cold. "In this man's army, every soldier is a rifleman first. Being a medic just means I have to carry twice the gear and work twice as hard to keep you idiots alive. If you spent more time practicing your sectors of fire and less time worrying about the cleanliness of my Band-Aids, maybe we wouldn't have been pinned down in a kill zone for so long." The silence that followed wasn't the awkward silence of an insult. It was the heavy, respectful silence of men who had just realized they were in the presence of a superior professional. They hadn't just been saved by a doc. They had been saved by a teammate they had fundamentally failed to see. They had looked at her scrubs and her gender and seen a liability. She had looked at the ridge and seen a mission. Henderson stepped forward and placed a heavy hand on Ava's shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of comfort, but one of brotherhood. "Good work, Ramirez. You held the line when it mattered. I'm putting you in for the watch on the way out." Ava just nodded, her focus already shifting. "Jackson needs an immediate medevac. His pressure is holding, but he's losing heat. Let's get him to the LZ before the sun gets any higher." Justice in the military isn't about medals or ceremonies. It's about the look in your teammates' eyes when the smoke finally clears and the adrenaline fades. For Ava Ramirez, that look had changed forever. She wasn't only a medic anymore. She was the one who watched the ridge when the world went dark. If you believe preparation matters more than titles, type "I owe you." The extraction was a study in professional military precision. The helicopters arrived within the hour, their rotors kicking up a localized storm of sand and gravel. Jackson was loaded onto the bird, his stretcher secured by the flight medics. As the rotors began to hum with a higher pitch, Ava stood back, her hands shielding her eyes from the grit. She watched the bird lift off, carrying her patient to the safety of a surgical center. Her job as a medic was done for the moment. Her job as a soldier continued. As the squad began the long, grueling trek back to the forward operating base, the atmosphere was fundamentally different. There was no more joking. There was no more loud, aggressive talk about liberty or gym routines. The men moved with a new kind of quiet discipline, their movements mirroring the calm, methodical woman walking in their center. Miller walked beside her for a while, his head down. He didn't say anything for the first 2 miles, the only sound being the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the shale. Finally, as they reached the outer perimeter of the base, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Ramirez," he said, "I was wrong about everything. I thought you were just here to fill a slot. I thought if things ever got truly bad, we'd have to spend our time protecting you. I thought you were a liability." Ava kept her steady pace, her eyes still scanning the horizon even now, miles from the ambush. "You did protect me, Miller. You and the sergeant kept their heads down while I got to Jackson. That's how a team works. You do your job so I can do mine. Today, our roles just got a little blurred." "Yeah, but you did more. You saw the things we didn't. You stayed calm when the rest of us were losing our heads. You saw the math of the ridge while I was just seeing the fire." Ava stopped and looked at him. For the first time all day, she let a small, tired smile touch her lips. It was the smile of a woman who had seen too much but still cared. Miller, when you're a medic, panic is a luxury you simply cannot afford. If I lose my head, people die. It's that simple. The rifle is just another tool in the bag, like a scalpel, like a bandage, like a chest seal. You use what you need to save the mission and bring everyone home. Titles don't mean anything when the bullets are real. When they finally entered the gates of the FOB, word had already spread through the grapevine. The radio chatter from the valley had been monitored by the Tactical Command Center. The doc who took the ridge and suppressed a sniper team was already the talk of the mess hall. Soldiers from other units stopped to watch them pass, their eyes lingering on Ava. But Ava didn't go to the mess hall for a hero's meal. She didn't seek out the attention or the stories. She went straight to the medical tent. She spent the next 3 hours in the dim light, cleaning her equipment, restock her trauma bags, and meticulously writing her patient care reports for Jackson. She worked in the shadows just as she always had, invisible and efficient. A few hours later, Sergeant Henderson walked into the tent. He looked exhausted, his uniform caked in salt and dust. He handed her a cold bottle of water and sat down on a crate. "The colonel wants to see you tomorrow morning, Ava," Henderson said, his voice quiet. "He's putting you in for a commendation for valor. He said your suppression of the North Ridge was textbook." Ava took a sip of the water and leaned back against a stack of IV fluid crates. "I don't need a medal, Sergeant. I just need more 4x4 gauze and another set of trauma shears. Miller broke mine when he was trying to help me cut Jackson's vest." Henderson laughed, a genuine warm sound. "You'll get your shears, Doc. And Ramirez, the boys, they're proud to serve with you. Miller's actually out there right now telling the new recruits that the medic is the most dangerous person in the entire squad. I think you've gained a few followers." Ava laughed softly, the sound tired but genuine. "As long as he stays hydrated and keeps his rifle clean, he can say whatever he wants about me." The community of the unit had been permanently altered. They realized that respect isn't a rank you wear on your chest or a badge on your shoulder. It's a shadow you cast through your actions when the pressure is highest. Ava had traded her passenger status for the role of an anchor. She was the one they looked to when the world became unpredictable. As the sun set over the desert base, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, Ava finally stepped out of the tent. She looked at her hands. They were still stained with a faint trace of Jackson's blood and the black carbon from the rifle's bolt. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt like a medic who had had a very, very long day. She adjusted her cap, looked toward the horizon, and began to prepare for the next patrol. If you believe respect should come from actions, type, "I will live with honor." In the heat of battle, roles are often the first thing to burn away. When the bullets start flying, the only thing that remains is training. The story of Ava Ramirez is a reminder that a quiet professional is defined by their readiness, not their job description. In the U.S. military, we have a saying, "Every soldier a rifleman." But the reality is deeper than that. Every professional in every field should be ready to step up when the situation changes. Ava didn't try to be a sniper. She didn't try to show off or prove the men wrong. She simply saw a gap in the defense, a threat that was going to kill her friends, and she used her training to close it. She understood that survival isn't about aggression. It's about observation. It's about keeping your head while everyone else is losing theirs. It's about understanding the why before you pull the trigger. Combat medics are a unique breed. They are tasked with bringing life into a place meant for death. They are the guardians of the squad's soul. But as Ava proved, being a guardian also means being a protector. We often underestimate the people in support roles. We look at the nurse, the technician, the analyst, or the medic, and we assume they aren't part of the real fight. But those are the people who often see the most. Those are the people who hold the pieces together when the plan falls apart. Ava Ramirez went back to being Doc. She went back to patching blisters and reminding Miller to drink water. She didn't change her personality. She didn't become a loudmouth warrior. She remained the quiet professional because she knew the truth. Skill doesn't need a megaphone. It only needs an opportunity. The next time you see someone doing their job quietly in the background, remember Ava. Remember that the calmest mind in the room is often the most dangerous and the most valuable. Honor the medic, honor the quiet one, because when the world explodes, they are the ones who will lead you home. If you believe the quiet professionals who solve the hardest problems deserve recognition, leave a comment and subscribe to the Veteran Story. We tell the stories behind the calm minds that change everything.